Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Ruhollah Nakhai. I will be helping with the interview as the translator. My colleague, Mr. Malek Mohammed, will be conducting the interview. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. آقای ملک اگه آماده اید من آمادم که شروع کنیم. میوت هستید آقای ملک.
He needs to. We need to unmute him. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think it worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
صدا من داری؟
بله بله.
صدامو داری؟
بله بله بله.
Yeah. We're hearing you.
Hello, Professor Worrell. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
I'm honored to be invited. Thank you very much.
Sorry, late time. آقای نخی اولین سوال بپرس.
Okay, so if you're ready, we can begin now.
Yes, I am fine.
All right. On the website of APA, it's written that APA is committed to addressing systematic racism. And recently, there was an apology from the association about the failures in fighting racism, and it was a headline on the website. Are these changes and is this emphasis a result of you becoming the head of the agency, the association?
No, I can't take the credit for this. So I would say that, in fact, APA has been concerned about these issues for some time. In 2020, so 2 years ago, you may have heard in the news when George Floyd was killed in the city of Minneapolis by the police, and we started having a number of racial unrest in the United States about police interactions with African Americans. And the president at that time, Sandra Schulman, actually had APA issue a statement condemning racism. Our mission, part of our mission, is to work towards solving important or critical societal issues. That's part of our mission as APA. And so Sandra Schulman started that process. Last year's president, Dr. Jennifer Kelly, she then decided that it would be useful for APA to issue an apology. So there's been a series of events. We started off with the first thing that Sandra did, Dr. Schulman did in 2020. Last year, we passed 3 resolutions, actually. The first one, it was a trio, was the apology that you're talking about to people of color for psychology's role in perpetuating systemic racism. The second one was psychology's responsibility, so to work towards dismantling racism in society. And so that's resolution number 2. And then the third resolution was psychology's role in health equity, because we have a number of, so for instance, COVID-19 has had a disproportionately negative impact on communities of color, African Americans, Latinx, and so forth. They have been hit harder than white populations. And many diseases, that's the case. So this is something that we are all committed to. And when the resolutions, the apology resolution was done at the APA Council last year, all of the members of the board were on stage at that time, so that, normally just the president and the secretary and the treasurer and stuff are up there, but everybody was up there, the whole board, to show that we were in support of this, because this work will not end with just the apology. This work is going to need to be ongoing for some time. And so, in fact, at the council meeting that's coming up in a few weeks, at the end of February, we will be looking at an audit of all the work that's being done right now to decide then what is the additional work that we need to start doing to continue into the future.
Yes, thanks. سوال دوم رو بپرس.
After being elected as the head of APA, you've said that with the mental health challenges posed by the pandemic, economic uncertainty, and concerns about racial justice, psychology's contribution to society has never been more important or more necessary. Now, the question that arises from that is, in many countries in which the governments don't have a very optimistic view towards non-government organizations and scientific organizations, and because of that, a lot of times these organizations are just to calm people down and just rationalize the policies that are being implemented. In your opinion, in a situation like this, what can be done? What is the extent of the action that can be taken with that kind of a view? And is APA also facing such difficulties in its work with regards to the governmental view towards these kind of organizations?
Right. That's an interesting question. So let me address all of the parts of it. First, with regard to the government, as you know, we just had a change in the federal administration. The Democrats are in power. One of the things that we try to do as a psychological and scientific society is we try to be neutral as much as we can, because our ethics code says do no harm and do good. And that applies to whether you are conservative or a liberal, whether you're poor or wealthy. So from our point of view, our job is to serve everyone. Specifically with regard to COVID-19, we actually, psychologists were involved in developing policies that were shared with the COVID-19 task force that the Biden administration, our current administration, had. So we weren't dealing with the president himself, but he had a task force, and psychology contributed to that. We also did some work for the Centers for Disease Control, for example, and in fact, some work not just in the healthcare space, but also in the education space, ways to, we created some modules for teachers, to train teachers to work with students. So more generally, of course, COVID-19 has hit all, even though some populations were hit harder, it has affected everybody. So APA is sort of the largest psychological association in the United States, right? We have 131,000 members, right? We have 54 divisions. We have psychologists in the workplace. We have psychologists who do consulting. We have psychologists in schools, you know. And so all of these divisions, in fact, are doing various things. So the school psychology division came up with a number of things for teachers and schools to think about, kids in distress and so forth. The workplace division, industrial organizational psychology, they came up with things to be done in the workplace. So it really has been a massive effort aimed at as much as we can at society. And we have psychologists who work in these spaces, but we have many psychologists in private practice. They have also been working a lot. In fact, a colleague of mine told me just yesterday, she's getting 5 to 6 new referrals every day, right? So there's a tremendous need. We've had psychologists who have actually been providing pro bono services to medical professionals, because doctors and nurses are really hard hit with the stress of the pandemic. So we've had people providing therapy to them. So it's been a multifaceted approach to this, both by individual practitioners and by people who work within organizations, right? I myself, did a couple interviews, tips for parents, and to work with their children, and tips for teachers to work with their children. So we really actually looked at it from all the specialties that we had.
Yes.
And what about the part about what about the problem with? I guess what the question is, when you look at it in the sense of the government not really trusting or not really having a positive view toward these organizations. What can an organization that's non-government in its nature and it's scientific in its nature, what can it do in the limits that could be imposed with a negative view?
Right. So I guess it really does depend on the national and cultural context, right? So for example, we in the US, we have a multiplicity of organizations. So there's an Association of Black Psychologists. There's a Society of Indian Psychologists for the Native Americans. We have a group called the Alliance, right? Where all of the presidents of all of these associations meet once every 2 months. And that group did some COVID-19 work for communities of color. We did not have to get governmental permission to do that. So we were able to act on our own. I think if you are in a situation, in a circumstance where the government controls are very tight, one of the things that I think one can do is work with individuals in neighborhoods, work with community groups, and so forth. So, we have had some partnerships, for instance, in some communities. The Black community is very involved in the church. So you have partnerships with churches, right? Where you can actually go to a church, in your case, potentially a mosque or whatever, and actually provide services through the auspices. And so sort of finding sort of every avenue, right, that you can to reach out to individuals, right? So that's how we think about it. Originally, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and we don't have a large psychological community. It's relatively new discipline in Trinidad. When I was growing up, I had to come to the United States to study United States and Canada because we didn't have psychology in Trinidad. But now there's psychology there, and I've been doing work with the Ministry of Education and stuff. So the idea is trying to get the government, even if they don't trust you, to help you focus on the clients, the people who need, right? So what we're interested in is dealing with the stress that teachers are facing, the stress that medical professionals are facing, the tremendous anxiety that children and youth are facing in the face of this pandemic, which is, in fact, in some sense, for many people, a sense of taking away their future, right? And so working on those issues. And so keeping the focus on that may be a useful way for psychological associations to get some inroads with less than friendly governmental institutions.
Thanks. آقای نخعی سوال 4 رو بپرس.
سوال 3 رو نپرسیدم.
نه فعلا اونو نه. بگو که به کووید اشاره کردی، اینو بپرس.
Okay. You referred to the pandemic and the issue with COVID-19. It's been 2 years since the pandemic has started. And during these 2 years, a lot of people around the world are facing serious psychological issues, anxiety, depression, and so on. Do you think psychology has been able to offer serious or a real help to people? In other words, from this perspective, what was the difference between this pandemic with the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago, during which psychology wasn't as widespread and as advanced as it is today? What was the difference that psychology caused between these two pandemics?
Yeah, that's a question I can only speculate about. I do know that APA was, of course, considerably smaller. APA was founded in 1892, and in the early 1900s was not very, very large. There was a small applied group. I think one of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to, in fact, provide information on a larger scale. So one of the things that, in fact, the internet has done is it's democratized, in some sense, access to information. So, for example, APA does a survey. It used to do it once a year called Stress in America, where we would survey, do a representative sample of Americans and report on the levels of stress. Well, with the COVID-19 pandemic starting, what we started to do is we started to do that survey, I think, every 2 months, so much more frequently, right? And then that information was provided to governments, right? So it was published on our website. We talked about it on the news media, so on CNN and so forth, so that in fact reporters were getting this information, and so that this information then could be used to inform public policy, right? We have, as you may have in Iran, individuals who are hesitant about taking the vaccine, right? So we have researchers who are working out what are some of the strategies that you can use for taking the vaccine. The APA was one of the groups that was saying, you need to work with leaders within communities, right? It's not just enough for somebody in Washington to say, you should do this, but you need to work with people who are respected in local communities, the local priest, the mayor of the town, the people who are closer to what is going on. So those are some of the things that we're able to do. I would like to think, I don't think there's a way to quantify this. But I would like to think that in fact, because of that, in fact, psychology was much more present and made a much bigger difference than would have happened a number of years ago. One of the other things that, in fact, I think we now have that we didn't have years ago is that there are APA affiliates. So every state in the United States has a psychological association. For instance, there's a California Psychological Association and a New York Psychological Association. All of these states who have psychological associations, those psychological associations have a representative on the APA Council of Representatives. So for the 50 states plus the territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, the provinces of Canada, all of them have representatives on the APA Council. So when we come up with policies, those representatives can then disseminate those policies back to their local associations, which are also doing work. And so in a way, there's a multiplier effect that APA has. And APA is the only there's the National Association of School Psychologists, which has the same model, representatives in every state. But APA and NASP are the only two groups that have that, and APA is much larger than the School Psychology Association. So I think that's really important. The other thing, I think there was our media presence increased by something like, I think 180% or something like that over the last 2 years, because we were deliberately trying to put things in front of reporters, both print and television and radio, so that in fact the information that we were sharing would get out to communities.
Thanks. سوال سوم رو بپرس حالا.
You have said APA is the only home for psychologists from all research subdisciplines and types of practice, and it is critical for APA to continue to be a vital contributor and leader. As the head of the oldest and the largest psychology association, psychology organization in the world, do you consider this organization to be a home for all psychologists around the world, or is it just a home for psychologists, for American and Canadian psychologists? And more generally, what's been the changes that has happened with your presence at the APA?
Right. So first and foremost, we'd like to think that everybody can find a home at APA with a caveat. I think one of the things we are very conscious of, America has often been very heavy-handed in the world, right? And trying to impose American systems in different places. So what we are doing, we have a number of international members, people who are based in other countries who are members. But we also have a number of memorandums of understanding with psychological associations in many different parts of the world, right? And so if something happens in that country, then we, in fact, can reach out and help. They can reach out to us for help. But they get to determine the kind of help that they want, right? So one of the other things that Sandy Schulman did, and I should point out that, again, APA, we have an Office of International Affairs. And we've had a lot of presidents who have really been US focused. But the 2020 president, again, Sandy Schulman, she does international consulting work. In fact, she's done a lot of work in the Middle East, I know, she's gone to Qatar and several other places to consult. She started something called the Learning Leadership Institute. It's an international learning leadership institute. And that she reached out. So these are people from psychological associations, I think from something like 80 different countries, right, who are participating in this. They did a presentation. So I had a mentee from Jamaica, right, who was in the Psychological Society of Jamaican Psychological Society, who developed a project to increase mental health awareness in the country of Jamaica. But she's developing the project. I served as a consultant in some sense because she knows Jamaica. At the same time, the president of the Jamaican Psychological Society was a mentor to somebody in another part of the world. So you had senior psychologists mentoring more junior psychologists in all over the world. And we had people from the Middle East, from the Far East, from the South Pacific. Sometimes we'd be online, there'd be 93 people from 60, 70 different countries online on Zoom. And so in some sense, it's not about APA sort of controlling, but APA providing the convening power, right, for people to get together, right? So a few years ago, we had the first Caribbean president, the 2017 president, Antonio Puente, was from Cuba. And one of the things he did is he hosted a reception, an international reception at the APA convention, and he sent out invitations to presidents of psychological associations around the world. Now, of course, the majority didn't come, but a sizable number of them did actually come to APA. And so our international office is really active in ways that we can help. The Barbadian Psychological Association turned, I think, 20 years old last year, and I did a videotape, congratulating them on their 20th anniversary. The Middle Eastern Psychological Association is actually turning 5 this year, and they've asked me to record a brief greeting to them, which I'll be doing sometime in the next few days. So we see our role really as having a lot of resources and being able to share the resources as necessary that would be useful to others, right? One of my particular areas of research is gifted and talented education. And there's a group within our education directorate which has a document called the Top 20 Principles for Psychology in Education. That document has now been translated into something like 14 or 15 different languages, right? It's on our website. People can download it and then they can ask to translate it. And so they do the translation. And we are assuming, they're translating it for their local context. So that's the role we see ourselves playing, as really being a supporter and consultant and stuff. So everybody's welcome, right? But we are not controlling.
Thanks. آقای نخعی بگو که ولی توی سازمان‌های برای پیوستن ایرانیان به این سازمان به دلیل مشکل تحریم و کارت بین‌المللی مؤسسات واسطه‌ای هستن که دارن عملاً دلالی میکنن از این جهت و رقم‌های بسیار بیشتری رو میگیرن از روانشناسان ایرانی برای پیوستن به APA.
Specifically for Iranian psychologists and practitioners, the problem is because of the issues of sanctions and all the other barriers that are between Iran and America. There are these intermediate mediating institutions and places who are basically kind of making money off of this situation and taking much more money and putting up much higher prices to help process the situation with an Iranian who wants to access and join and get access to APA. That's the thing that's Iranian psychologists are facing right now.
Right. So yeah, that's something that, so we don't have, as I said, we are a non-government organization. So we actually have a mission at the UN, but we really don't have a direct any direct connection with the US government, other than when we are sometimes asked questions. So we will, we are setting up a briefing right now on violence in schools, that we're going to do a congressional briefing. We invite Congress people to come. They choose whether to come or not, and we present the information. We also provide information when they're doing legislation, but we, the issues of visas and those kinds of things, we really don't have any way to speak to those. We actually, we passed a policy statement when children were being separated by their parents, from their parents crossing the border, people who were coming into the country illegally, and the government was taking kids and separating kids from their parents. And that, of course, is a psychological issue that has clearly psychological ramifications. And so we then were able to issue a policy statement about that. We try to be very careful about that when we speak, we are speaking from psychological science, right? And so, and our code calls for us to speak to human justice and to human rights and social justice. So we speak out on those kinds of issues when people's rights are being violated and stuff in a specific sense. Something like immigration is something that we don't typically speak out about because it really doesn't fall within our purview as an association. And if we were to use our platform to speak out on political issues, there are going to be ramifications for us. We actually could lose our status as an NGO. There's a special status that you get from the tax authority, right? And stuff as a non-governmental organization that's serving society. So we have to be very, very careful about not speaking about issues that are not specific to psychology and psychological science.
بپرس که آیا شما با جامعه روانشناسی ایران آشنا هستید؟ آقای دکتر رضا زمانی در سال 2020 از سوی بخش بین‌المللی APA به عنوان برجسته‌ترین روانشناس سال شناخته شد.
How familiar are you with the Iranian psychology scene? In 2020, I believe Dr. Reza Zamani was recognized as the most prominent psychologist of that year by APA. How much do you know and how familiar are you with Iranian psychology scene?
I am not at all familiar with the Iranian psychology scene. So I actually, last year, I was not on the board of directors in 2020. So I became president-elect in 2021. I ran for president in 2020. I became president-elect in 2021. So that's when I came onto the board of directors. I had been on the board of directors earlier, but we had not had any dealings with Iran that I knew of. They may have had with the international office, but I was not at the level where I would know about that. I have had a visiting scholar from Iran, actually, who came and worked with me at Berkeley. He was with me for a year at the University of California at Berkeley. We have several publications together and are working on a few more. He's translated one of the scales that I'm a co-author of into Farsi. But I don't have much knowledge of the Iranian psychological scene.
Thanks. بپرس افزایش تعداد روانشناسان که روزافزونن مثلا و الان در ایران ما یه چیزی حدود 200,000 دانشجوی روانشناسی داریم، موضوع آموزش رو چالش برانگیز میکنه. شما به عنوان رئیس مهمترین سازمان صنفی روانشناسان چه توصیه هایی برای عدم کاهش کیفیت آموزش دارید؟
The situation is that there's been a much more interest in psychology, especially in recent years in Iran, and there's been a lot more students trying to have their major in psychology. I believe there's 200,000 students studying psychology in Iran currently. That creates some challenges. As the head of the most prominent psychological organization in the world, what would you suggest can be or should be done to make sure that the quality of education doesn't fall when this large number of people are joining in?
Right. I think that there are some things that you can do. So one of the things that I'll tell you what we've done here in America, and that may be possible that you all can adapt. As a psychological association, we have several different units. So we have a board of scientific affairs, for example. We have a board of educational affairs, right? Now, it's interesting, it's important to note that the board of educational affairs was only started in 1980, when in fact, and my doctoral advisor actually was one of the people who pushed APA to have a board of educational affairs, because when she suggested it, they were like, why would we be interested? Why would we do this, right? But now there is a board of educational affairs and an education directorate, and what that group does several things. So it has done, for instance, it has done curricula for high school psychology, because psychology has become one of the most popular, if not the most popular major in the United States as well. So, and psychology is now being offered in high schools, secondary schools. So we have a curriculum, a mock curriculum for high school students. Now, we can't force anybody to have it, but we have it and it's available on the website. We actually have a mock curriculum for undergraduate education. So what are the things, if you are getting an undergraduate degree in psychology, what are the courses that you should have, right? So in that way, we are actually able to get experts who are teaching at those levels, right, to get together in a committee and put out this curriculum. And the way so the committee does the work, they come up with a draft. That draft then gets circulated. So it will go to the Board of Scientific Affairs, even though it was developed by the Board of Education Affairs, a working committee. It will go to the Board of Professional Affairs. It will go to the Committee on Ethnic Minority Affairs. It will go to, we have something like, I think 8 boards and 20-something standing committees, socioeconomic status, health equity, right? All of those people get to see those curricula and comment on it, so that the final document that is then approved by the APA Council, for it to become policy, it's got to be approved by council. It has gone through several rounds of review. And then when it comes to council, some council members experts may tweak it a little bit again, right? And so then we have this document which represents a broad consensus of what should be done, and stuff. And that then is, schools, universities can use that as a blueprint for their curriculum. We also have doctoral, we have some curricula for specifically health service psychology at the doctoral level. I think that's the one we specify most closely. People who are going to be seeing clients. So school psychologists, clinical psychologists, counseling psychologists, they have specified curriculums at the doctoral level. And in fact, you've got, and those programs are accredited to offer and visited periodically every 5 years, every 10 years, to make sure that psychologists who are going to be working with clients, the students who are getting that training to be those psychologists are actually getting appropriate training.
Thanks. بپرس به شما به عنوان یکی از مهمترین روانشناسان مدرسه هم در جهان شناخته میشید و سالها هم رئیس بخش روانشناسی مدرسه APA بوده. موضوع بسته بودن مدارس در طول همهگیری یکی از چالش‌های این همهگیری بوده که بخشی از روانشناسان موافق این موضوع بودن، مخصوصاً با توجه به همهگیری اومیکرون که کودکان رو هدف قرار میده. آیا شما راهی به نظرتون میرسه که هم بچه‌ها سالم باشن و هم ما مزایای مدرسه رو داشته باشیم؟
You're also famous as one of the most prominent psychologists with regards to the psychology of schools and school psychology. And you've been head of I believe, a committee on APA, specifically about the schools. One of the things that's been going on with the pandemic has been the closing of the schools and online education and everything, which there is a conversation about. There's a challenge about it. Some people agree with it, even among psychologists, some people agree with it, and some people think it's doing harm, especially now with the Omicron variant, which specifically hurts children more. do you have any suggestion, any approach that could both help us keep children safe and at the same time have us take the benefits of the school system with everything that it provides for children?
Right. That's a tough question. I will say that from where I come down, I think we know that it's very difficult for younger students in particular to wear masks. So it's hard for them to keep it on and stuff. They want to play with it, and they chew on it. And so it's not clear that it's serving the benefits that it has. I also recognize that certainly for adolescents now, the social aspects of school are really important, and so stuff. One of the things I said in an interview I gave is that, in essence, we have people who are falling into sort of three groups, right? We have children and adolescents whose parents have lots of resources. They have money, they have high-speed internet. Those kids have their own cell phones, they have their own tablets. So for them, the pandemic, yes, they didn't have the physical interaction, but they were not affected substantially in quite the same way because they were able to continue to socialize and so forth, right? And if their parents are people who were able to work from home, they didn't have to worry about their parents getting ill, right? Then you have a group of kids who, in point of fact, we have a lot of work to do. They disappeared from school. They had no internet. They weren't getting to school. They weren't seeing friends. Now that schools have reopened, I think there's still students who we have not seen who have come back that they're looking for and trying to find. And then there's a middle group that, in fact, one might argue those are the ones we need to pay the most attention to. I think ultimately the decision to close schools was made, and I think for the right reasons. I lost my brother-in-law. My sister's husband died from COVID, and he got COVID from my great niece, his granddaughter, because she brought it into the house. But she was showing no symptoms. This was before Omicron, right? So that we know that children can spread COVID even if they do not get very sick from it themselves. And then Omicron came along and they are getting sick. So I think it was important for us to take measures to mitigate that. This is why I think the vaccines are important, particularly the vaccines for kids, because then we know that at least they are protected, not just, so if they get Omicron, they are less likely to have severe illness. I do think that in closed spaces, I mean, what we did in many of the contexts where we could do that here was have smaller classes so that fewer kids in the classroom. So there's a rotation, right? So they're getting school 2 days a week, and they're circling through so that everybody has some time to get things and stuff. So I think we are now in a phase where we are getting ready to open back up. But ultimately, I think the larger lesson that for me from COVID has been, we have not paid enough attention to resilience and coping, right? One of the things, this pandemic, of course, nobody anticipated it. But in the past, we had SARS, we've had Ebola, we've had a number of things that have happened. They've not been on the scale of COVID, but they've been signaling, right? Because the world is getting so much more interconnected. And so it is likely that this will not be the last pandemic, even when, if it, and stuff, that there will be other circumstances. And I think it's really important for us to really, in addition to teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and all of those kinds of things, to teach social emotional resilience, right? To be able to be flexible in the face of danger, in the face of troubles. Now, that doesn't mean they're not individuals who are not going to require specialized treatment and therapy, right? And we need to provide that. So we need to have good screeners, but we also need to actually help students so that when something like this happens, fewer of them are going to be affected as negatively as has been in this particular case.
Thank you.
بگو که بسیاری از خانواده‌ها البته فکر میکنن که دولت‌ها برای عادی سازی به دنبال باز کردن مدارس هستن. مثلا در ایران چند روز گذشته وزیر آموزش پرورش گفته که در هیچ کشوری به خاطر اومیکرون مدارس بسته نشده که به نظر نمیرسه این خبر واقعی باشه، ولی خانواده‌ها باز هم فرزندشون رو مدرسه نمیفرستن چون به نظر اونها بین باز بودن و بسته بودن مدارس تفاوت زیادی وجود نداره به جهت رفتار و پیشرفت تحصیلی فرزندشون.
One issue is a lot of people, a lot of families, actually, a lot of parents believe that opening the schools back up is being done with the goal of normalizing the situation with COVID. And it's a political decision. I mean, recently the Minister of Education in Iran said that no country has closed schools up because of Omicron, which I don't know how accurate that is. But there are still parents who are still not sending their children back to school, even though the schools are open up again, because they don't think that there's much of a difference between the children going to school and just staying home and studying online. So they're not trusting the system. They're not sending their children back to school because they think it doesn't matter if they actually go there and they're not risking it. So,
right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I've been living in the US now for 30 something years. In the United States, we have a policy that the parent gets to make the final decision for their child. Except in cases of abuse and that kind of thing, right? So we actually have a group of families here who homeschool their children. Even before the pandemic, they homeschooled their kids. What the US does have in place, though, is that if you are homeschooling your child, your child still has to take the national exams because we need to know that your child is getting an education because, that's an education is a right. Your right as a child in the society. And so in the current context of COVID, one can understand parents being reluctant to send their kids back to school, but they also, and they are they may be right in some cases that the students may be learning as much at home. It depends on the quality of the school. What they are not getting, of course, I think which is, and what we have seen in the US is they're not getting the social interaction, which is important in children and adolescents, right? And if you remember, adolescence is a time when students are finding their identities, right? Defining themselves, right? And so who am I going to be, who am I now and who am I going to be as an adult, right? And they are sort of shedding, paying more attention to peers than to parents, right? The peer group, social group becomes much more important. And so that is what students are missing. And what we have seen in the US is tremendous increase in anxiety and depression among adolescents. So with the closure of schools. And so those are the concerns that parents need to be worried about. With adolescents in particular, I don't have any children, but if I had children, we would be having a very serious talk. You'd be going back to school, but you'd be wearing your mask. I don't care what your friends are doing. You'll be wearing your mask and stuff. And, so at Berkeley, where I am, we are a university, we are back in person, but we have to fill out a symptom screener every day before we go in. It's on the smartphone and we get permission to go in or not based on what we say. And we have to wear masks, students, faculty, and staff. So when I'm I'm now teaching with a mask. My students in the classroom, my doctoral students are wearing masks. When our students are doing assessments, the students we are learning to give intelligence tests and so forth, they are wearing a mask and they have the young kids are wearing a face shield. So they're not wearing the mask, but they have a face shield, and we've gotten face shields in the, superhero face shields. So the kid can choose if they want to be Superman or whatever, right? and stuff, but to get them as a part of it. So that you are in keeping the safety protocols in place while allowing the students to, in fact, engage in the social interaction that the school provides, and stuff. So that's that. But it's really, I think we're in a situation where it's really difficult to know exactly what the right thing is. And the US being as the political system here is such that we have some states where they never mandated masks, right? That are more conservative states. They never mandated masks, not their parents who have their kids wear masks, but that state never had a mask mandate. California and some of the more liberal states, they mandated masks. So our mask mandate as a state, we have an indoor mask mandate that's only going away on Tuesday of next week. But we've had that mask mandate in place for the last 2+ years. And while the state is taking it away, for instance, the university has said, we are still going to be wearing masks on campus. So individual groups can make decisions.
بپرس که این سوال ممکنه که سوال سختی باشه. ما در سالهای اخیر در ایران بین دانش آموزان یک افت تحصیلی شدیدی رو می‌بینیم که حالا همه‌گیری این رو شدتش رو شیب سعودیش رو بیشتر کرده. به نظر میرسه یکی از مهمترین دلایل این افت تحصیلی کاهش ارزش تحصیل و گسترش فرهنگ دلالی و یک شبه به جایی رسیدنه. بسیاری از دانش آموزان ایرانی در سالهای قبل میخواستن راهی که استیو جابز رفته رو برن و اکنون میخوان راهی که ایلان ماسک رفته رو برن. برای خانواده‌های نگران چنین دانش آموزانی چه کارهایی میشه انجام داد؟ چه توصیه‌هایی میشه انجام داد؟
This question might be a little different from the other ones. The situation that we've been facing in Iran is the quality, not in the sense of the quality of education that is provided, but the quality of how much the level of the grades and the level of education that children are getting has been decreasing, and the pandemic made it much worse. And part of the problem is that the value of education has decreased severely in the children and in young people in Iran. A lot of them want to take the get rich quick route and find a way to just become successful immediately. A lot of them wanted to. It used to be everybody wanted to become a Steve Jobs. Now everybody wants to become Elon Musk, and so they don't care that much about the official education that they get at school.
Right.
What can be done and what can be told to the families that are worried about this situation with their children who are just not paying attention to this stuff?
Again, y'all ask very difficult questions. I think, one of the things that I try to do with my doctoral students is to provide information. And I provide it multiple times, so, it'll come up and I bring it up in different contexts because we have that same issue in the United States. So for instance, as the board of directors of APA and all us, we are volunteers, right? APA has a permanent staff that's their job. They work there. But the council meets twice a year. So many of us who are doing work for APA and our boards and committees are volunteers. And just this morning on a call, I was hearing from the president of one of the other associations that their young people don't want to do the committee work unless they're getting paid for it, right? And of course, there's no way these organizations can survive if they're paying every volunteer that they now have. Our council has 182 members. We have over 100 members on boards and committees, right? So what I do, as I said, one of my areas of research is talent development. I talk about the importance of matching what you do to the things you like. I share stories. For example, everybody talks about Steve Jobs, but we look at the probability of you becoming a Steve Jobs. So I share with students for example, that we have hundreds of thousands of students in secondary schools who play sport. A few thousand of them then play sport in college, right? Maybe up to about 50,000 when you look at all the sports in colleges. The major leagues, Major League Baseball, football, basketball, hockey, track and field, the total number of people they take in each year is fewer than 300. So we actually show them these statistics that, and I say to all of the young African-American men who want to become a basketballer or a footballer, well, I want to be a footballer, but if that doesn't work, I'll do chemistry. I said, well, make sure you study in your chemistry class, because it's easier for you to get a doctoral degree in chemistry than it is for you to get to the National Football League, right? So and we also sort of share stories of individuals who went into a field where they thought they could make a lot of money. They became lawyers or doctors and hated it. And they walk away because it's just not resonant. It's not what they wanted to do. My mother wanted me to be a medical doctor, and I said, that's not for me. Blood is not my thing. And my parents luckily allowed me to follow my dream. So that's one of the things, that in fact, having kids explore and find something they're passionate about and stuff. And this is one of the things we talk about. So have them, as in childhood and adolescence, try a number of different things broadly. Because if they find the thing that they're really passionate about, then the motivation takes care of itself, right? And so forth. And I remind my students that my mother told me, I was taking piano lessons, and I started taking piano lessons when I was 6 years old. And at age 14, I said to her, I'm not going into music. I want to stop. And my mom says, I will let you stop, but I promise you that you will regret stopping when you're older. I said, no. And of course, now I regret that I can't play anymore. I share this with students, right? That in fact, that sometimes the things that may not be important to you now are going to be much more important to you in the future. And what the research shows is that, to a large extent, putting outside of the COVID-19 context, children tend to be resilient. So that even the ones who seem to be drifting and astray, to a large extent, unless they fall into bad company and and that kind of thing, end up in crime and stuff, things end up working out. So
thanks. بگو که میدونیم که زمان ما تمام شده. به عنوان سوال آخر چه توصیه‌ای برای جامعه روانشناسی ایران دارید که بتونه بیشتر روانشناسی رو در جامعه ایرانی گسترش بده؟
یه سوال پنجم نوشته بودید که دوره ایشون یه سال است.
اونم پس اونو در ادامه این بپرس، با هم دیگه بپرس.
اینو اول بپرسین، این دوره رو بپرسم، بعد اون سوال آخر رو. One thing that we noticed and looks kind of, maybe strange is the right word for it, looks kind of strange to us, is the duration of the term of the head of the APA, which I believe is 1 year.
Yes.
Is it really possible to implement and execute a lot of ideas and programs in just 1 year?
The short answer to that is no, it is not possible. But one of the things, I served on the board of directors from 2016 to 2018. I was a member at large. And while I was on the board, we had a number of conversations about this, because what happens is a president comes in and has a 3-year period, right? You're president-elect 1 year, president 1 year, and past president, right? And the year you're president, you're chair of the board. And so many presidents come in and they have some initiative that's really specific to them, right? And so they work on that for that 1 year. And we thought that while that's fine, that does not serve the association well. It doesn't serve psychology well. So we actually instituted a strategic planning process, which we instituted. It went on, and in fact, the council, so it started, I believe, in 2017. The council passed our strategic plan in 2019. I was not on the board when that plan passed. This is the 4th year of the strategic plan. But once we did that, the idea was that any president who comes in, you can have an initiative, but the strategic plan will guide the association, so that the association is not going to change when the presidency changes. The strategic plan goes ahead. You can do your stuff over here. Now, you should choose to do something that's within the framework of the strategic plan, but you can also choose to do something else, but you cannot get the association away from the strategic plan. One of the things I was doing in January, and even up to this earlier this month, is we've been doing orientations, because we have new council members starting. About a third of our council turns over. We have, board and committee members, new board and committee members coming in because there's a rotation. And in all of those orientations, we show the strategic plan, and we show what the strategic goals are, and we say to them, your work, if you are going to be applying to the central, to the board of directors for funding for a project, you've got to show how this project fits the strategic plan. So that plan becomes our North Star, and other things can happen on the side, but the strategic plan keeps the ship on a straight course.
Thanks. بپرسونم.
که سوال آخر گفتین که بپرسم که چه توصیه‌ای
که به عنوان رئیس مهمترین سازمان صنفی روانشناسان در جهان چه توصیه‌ای دارید برای گسترش روانشناسی در جامعه ایرانی به جامعه روانشناسان ایران؟ چه کارهایی باید انجام بدن که روانشناسی رو بتونن تو جامعه گسترش بدن و در سیاست گذاری ها نقش بیشتری داشته باشه؟
We know we've already taken enough of your time. As our last question, as the head of the most important organization in psychology in the world, what would your advice be to the Iranian psychology field and the people who work in the Iranian psychology with regards to increasing the role and spreading the word basically of psychology in Iranian society, and also making it contribute more and have more of a role in policy making and in the decision makings of government and different institutions?
Right. I would say a couple of things. One, I think it's important to sort of do a scan of society and see what are the needs that Iranian society has, right? And it's fine. I mean, at APA, we have 54 divisions. We have trauma psychology. We have media psychology. Some of those things may not be useful or important in an Iranian context. So you want to make sure that you see what Iran needs. And then actually encourage students to go into those areas of psychology. So one of the things we are actively about is having students who are into mathematics, right? But they don't want to be mathematicians. Well, you can become a quantitative psychologist and develop tests, right? And you're using your mathematical skills, right? So it's particularly important for people to understand that psychology is not just about mental health. That's a critical component of it. But everything that's behavioral, everything that's attitudinal, everything that's cognitive, that's all psychology, right? So we have a cognitive psychology division, we have a developmental psychology division. And so that's the other thing. Encourage students to go into multiple aspects of psychology that are useful for Iran. And then the third thing I would say is, well, actually, two more. The third thing is when people are doing their research, to the extent possible, it's not always possible, but to the extent possible, do research that has translational interest, right? So if you can do research that is going to, you're interested in education, well, involve teachers in your research so that in fact they can advise you, so that when your research has practical applications. And lastly, encourage psychologists to go into government, to be policymakers. So we have several Congress people, not a lot, about 3 or 4 who are psychologists. And when we need, so we can go to them and say, this is an important issue. Could you raise it on the floor of the US Congress? Right? We also have a large number of psychologists. We have our Division 18 is psychologists in public service. These are psychologists who work in the government agencies, the National Institutes of Health, the Center for Disease Control, the National Institute for Child Development. So we have psychologists who are working in all of these areas, who are the grant officers who help decide who gets funding and who does not, right? And so they, in those places, can influence people and in fact take the voice of psychology to those places.
Thank you very much, Professor Warren, for interview.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be interviewed. I would ask, if possible, that when it's written up, if you could share the document with me so I can give it. APA likes us to pass it on. I don't know if there's anybody who reads Arabic or Farsi, but certainly I will turn it in. So thanks very much. I'm honored to have been invited to be interviewed.
Thank you for your time.
عکس ایستاده تمام قد و بگو که ما کجا میتونیم که یک رزومه کاملی از زندگی شما داشته باشیم.
Just one last thing before we go. First, we would, if it's possible, we would like a full body picture of you, standing for the cover. If you can send it to my colleague, Mr. Malik Mohammed. And also, where can we get to sort of a biography, sort of a resume, a description of all your work? What? As in the introduction part of the interview, where can we access, basically the history of your work and your.
I can send you. So with regard to the picture, I know APA had some pictures taken. I have not seen them. So I will ask, I think, put in a request for them, and I haven't gotten them yet, but I will ask again tomorrow, and I will email that to Professor Mohammed. And I will, with regard to the bio, I can send you the bio from my website, but I can also send you, I have, Robert Sternberg did an edited book on several of us, and he asked us, so we did our histories, and I can send that might be useful. And it talks about, we were to talk about how did we decide to study the things we studied. Mm-hmm. So I can send that document.
That would be great. Both of those would be very useful to us, and thank you.
So thank you very much. I'll send the article today as soon as I get off this call, and I will try to get the picture to send tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. That would be great.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Good night, Professor.
Right.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.